Hello all, welcome to the video series SQL. In this video, we will talk about the database object called stored procedures. As part of this, we will talk about what is a definition of a stored procedure, what are the uses of stored procedure, what are the types of stored procedures that we have in Microsoft SQL Server, and how do we use DDL commands, create, alter, and drop to work with the stored procedures. And we will also look at how to run or execute an existing stored procedure and how do we work with input and output parameters of the stored procedure. So let's get started. So what is a stored procedure? A stored procedure is a set of SQL statements that we write and save it in a database for future use. Okay, so stored procedure is a set of SQL statements that are written and saved in a database for future use. Okay, so we did the same thing for views, triggers, and functions as well. We tried to write the code in SQL and then gave it a name and then saved in a database for future use. But what is the difference between a view, function, trigger, and a stored procedure? So view, function, and trigger, they have their own set of limitations. Like a view can have only one result set. Okay, only one SQL statement can be created inside a view definition. You cannot have multiple SQL statements in a view. And function must return a value. Without returning a value, a function cannot be created. All right, and then trigger. A trigger fires automatically when an event occurs in a database. All right, so but stored procedure, basically you can try to put in all your code inside a stored procedure, and most of your database code can be written in the form of stored procedures. Okay, so stored procedure is a database object where 90% of the time when you try to design some query or design something, you try to put your code in a stored procedure and then you save it in a database as a stored procedure object. Okay, so that way you can have all your code inside the stored procedure in a database, and then you can share this stored procedure with the other teams to provide the data. Okay, let's say Java person comes in and then says he needs a stored procedure to get customer information, or to store customer information, or to update customer information, or to delete customer information. Okay, or order information. Any information that you are trying to get, you can get in the form of a stored procedure. Okay, even for the reporting purpose, people can talk to DBAs and database developers to get some stored procedures created to get some data. All right, so without stored procedure, we still can get all this data in the form of SQL code itself. Okay, so if the Java person wants to get some customer information, he will go and connect to the database, and then he will say select star from table or select whatever columns from the table, and then he will try to write this SQL code in his Java program. Okay, so that is called inline SQL code. Okay, writing single statements inside the Java. Okay, that's called as inline SQL code. So okay, that's not a best practice because of various reasons. The first reason can be the Java developers or any other developers who are trying to write this SQL code may not be a database expert, so they can't take care of all indexing or optimization of the code. Okay, but as a DBA or a developer, you can put in all your expertise to get the code developed in a better way. Okay, in an optimized way. Okay, so that's about inline SQL code. So instead of putting your code in the form of inline SQL, you can actually write stored procedures and then share these stored procedures with other teams to get the data that they want. Okay, so let's talk about the uses of these stored procedures. So easy maintenance. Since I said instead of putting your SQL statements in multiple places, you can put your code in a stored procedure. That's a easy maintenance, because if you try to say select star from customer table, in many places you use that code, and then if something, the table name changes or some columns got added or some columns got modified, you have to go to these various places and change your code. Instead of that, if you put your code inside a stored procedure, you can change in one place and everywhere it gets reflected. All right, so that's easy maintenance. And then optimized code. Whenever you try to create a stored procedure, SQL Server automatically creates plan for that, and then it saves that plan in the database. And whenever the stored procedure is executed, that plan is being used to execute the code faster. Okay, so when you do that in a form of inline SQL code, that may be not as better as this stored procedure because of the plan. Okay, and security. When you put your code inside a stored procedure, you can give permissions to a specific stored procedure who can execute this stored procedure. Okay, so if you have an inline SQL statement, anyone can come in and then take that code and then just execute that code. Okay, but then if you put your code in a stored procedure on a production environment, you cannot execute that stored procedure without exact user permissions. Okay, so you can secure what's happening on your database in the form of stored procedures. Okay, and then segregating your logic, you can group your logic together and put it in a stored procedure. Okay, if you try to write your code in multiple places, it may get repetitive sometimes. Okay, so the same code can be repeated in multiple places and people may be writing it differently with various different definitions, right? But then if you try to put your code in your stored procedure, you can just share that stored procedure with all these teams. Okay, and then it will get rid of repetitive code as well. Okay, those are some of the uses of stored procedure. And one other important use is it reduces network traffic. Okay, what it means by reducing network traffic. Let's say if you are trying to execute some 400 lines of code. Okay, all that 400 lines of code needs to be traveled through the network. Okay, instead of that, if you try to put all these 400 lines of code in a database and then just give a name called stored procedure name, and instead of calling 400 lines, just call that stored procedure name which is of like one line, and then you are basically trying to reduce the traffic in the network. Okay, so stored procedure mainly reduces the network traffic. You don't have to pass all the code through the network, just pass the name of the code and then the code is saved in the database anyhow, so it will take that code from the database and then it will execute it. So it reduces a lot of network traffic. Okay, and then we'll talk about the types of stored procedures. So system stored procedures and user defined stored procedures. System stored procedures are created by Microsoft SQL Server. They give lot of information about the system. Okay, so there is a separate video to talk about system stored procedures. So we'll talk about user defined stored procedures. User defined stored procedures are the one that we create for supporting our application. Okay, and DDL commands create, alter and drop. Okay, we use these commands to work with the stored procedures. Okay, and executing a stored procedure, once we create the stored procedure, it's saved in the database. So how to call this stored procedure to get the work done? Okay, so we can use a command called execute. All right, and then input and output parameters. So whenever you are trying to create stored procedures, you can have input parameters and output parameters. Input parameters will take the values inside, take the values, and then based on that values, the definition of the stored procedure can be written, and output parameters gives the result out of the stored procedure. Okay, so let's try to create some sample stored procedures in this in database, and then let's see how it works. Okay, so let's say we want to we have a table called customers. Okay, we designed this table. Now the Java person comes in and then says, okay, the customer wants to insert information into this table. So I want to have a stored procedure to insert the customer information. So what we'll try to do is we'll try to create a stored procedure, and we will give that stored procedure to the Java team. So let's say we are creating a stored procedure, create procedure, schema name, and then SP stands for stored procedure naming convention, and insert customer information. Okay, and then the parameter name is customer first name varchar 1000 and customer last name varchar 100 and customer email varchar 100. So that's the information that the customer wants to provide, and the Java person will try to capture that website. Whatever the customer enters through the website, he will capture that information, and then he will send that information to this stored procedure. Okay, so as begin and end. Okay, so all our code goes in here. So I will try to insert the data into customers table, and the values are fname, lname, and email id. Okay, and then the values will be these variables. Okay, whatever is passed to the stored procedure, those values can be inserted into this particular table. That's pretty simple code to enter customer information into the customer table. Okay, so I created this stored procedure. So now how and where do I see this stored procedure in a database? So this stored procedure is created against customers database. So go in customers database and then refresh your programmability stored procedures. You can see that stored procedure sp insert customer information. If you right click that and script stored procedure, you can look at the stored procedure definition. Okay, so that's the definition, and then that's the stored procedure. Okay, so now we created this stored procedure. Okay, we will give the Java team use this stored procedure name and pass these values. That way we can save the customer information. So the Java team will try to run this code like this to enter customer information. Okay, so let's say John and last name is Baguette and customer email john@gmail.com. Okay, so that's the code. Java team will try to put it in their Java code, and then once they try to execute that code, it says one row affected, and then you can see John's information has been entered into customer table. Okay, so instead of putting this insert statement in the Java code, we created a stored procedure and then we gave the stored procedure. So if tomorrow the column names changed or customer table name changed, whatever changed, or even if we want to add another column, we can change the stored procedure, and then there will be no code changes for the Java team. Okay, it's all in the stored procedure, so that's easy maintenance. Okay, so even if the stored procedure doesn't work, it's taking so much time to execute, then you can look at the stored procedure directly instead of going and digging in the Java code. Okay, so that's an important for maintenance wise. Okay, so now the Java team asks you to output the customer ID information. Okay, because once the customer enters his customer information, you want to give the customer, okay, this is your customer ID. Whenever you come back, you can use this customer ID. Okay, so now you will change this stored procedure by using alter command, and you say declare customer ID integer and select customer ID is equal to maximum of customer ID from dbo.customer. So once the customer has been inserted into this table, you can get the customer ID and you can say select customer ID as customer ID. Okay, so that's the definition you changed, and if you try to execute this for Robert, you can see the customer ID has been showed now. Okay, so this information can be showed back to the customer. Okay, so if you see into the table, Robert's information has been inserted, and then this customer ID is shown back to Java team. That way they will try to get this information and then show it to the customer. Okay, so that's one way of showing back the customer information. And then the other way is by using output parameter. Okay, here what we did, we just selected the value from the table. Okay, so we can also use output parameter. These customer first name, last name, and email are input parameters. They are taking the values. Okay, and we can create an output parameter as well, integer, and all you have to specify is output. Okay, that way SQL Server knows that this is output parameter. Okay, so now instead of selecting the value, once the customer information has been inserted into the table, get the maximum value from this table and just pass that value to this variable. Okay, and how do I select this variable now? So now the code will be declare customer ID output integer, and this variable parameter is equal to customer ID output. Okay, and then you say output select customer ID output, and let's say we'll try to insert Tom. It says too many arguments specified. Let's see why is that. Okay, we'll try to execute this stored procedure, and then I tried to change the definition. I don't know if I ran that before, and then re-execute this, and then you can see 10112 as the customer ID, and you can see Tom Hanks information has been entered, and that's the customer ID. So you can either do a select query here, or you can also use output parameters to get the data out of the stored procedure. Okay, so that's two ways of getting the data out of the stored procedure. So in this, we were getting only one row and one column, that is just a scalar value. You can also get the output as a full result set, full table. Okay, so let's see how. So the reporting team comes in, and then he says, I want to get a stored procedure which gets all the customer information. Okay, so now I'll try to create a stored procedure for the reporting team. I'll call it as SP for reporting, and then I'll say get customer information. Okay, and then as begin and then end. Okay, I don't want to he says, okay, I don't need any parameter information, I need everything, all the customers. Okay, so I'll say select star from dbo dot customers c inner join, so this is just customers first name, last name, email ID, right? So let's say he wants to get customers order information as well. So I'll say inner join dbo dot orders o c dot customer ID is equal to o dot customer ID, and inner join dbo dot items I on o dot order item ID is equal to I dot item ID. Okay, so all the information that the reporting team wanted is c dot first name as customer first name, and c dot last name as customer last name, and c dot email ID as customer email ID, and o dot order date time, and I dot item name as ordered item. Okay, so basically that's the query that I'm trying to give it to reporting team. Okay, but since there are no orders, looks like there's no orders in orders table. Select top 10 star from dbo dot orders. There is actually one order, but this customer ID is not there in customer table. That's the reason we didn't see any data for that join. So I'll just try to put some orders into orders table. Okay, so even if someone is trying to, if Java team comes and then says to you, okay, I need a stored procedure to insert orders, you can create that orders stored procedure as well. Okay, customer ID and order item ID and order date time. I think there is a default constraint on that. Customer ID, let's say 110 1010, and then order item ID is 1. Okay, and then we'll also enter for 10 12 and 2. Okay, so now if I try to run this query, you can see John has ordered laptop and Tom has ordered laptop bag. Okay, so that's the query, and then I'll try to put this query inside a stored procedure, and you can see that stored procedure here, and then you can give this stored procedure name to the reporting team, and then all they will do is just run this stored procedure like that without any parameters. Okay, so this is their report. They will use this data for the report. Okay, so this is the result set. Okay, so you can have multiple result sets as well. So let's say I'll do, instead of this way, he wants customer as first result, customer information as first result, and order information as second result. Okay, something like this. So if I try to change the stored procedure and then run the stored procedure, you can see there are two result sets. The first information shows the customer information, the second information shows the order information. Okay, so basically you can give multiple result set as output in a stored procedure. Okay, which you can't do in a trigger or in a function or in a view. Okay, so and then you can put all your while loop logic, or you can use temporary tables. You can insert data into from one table to another table, so you can do lot of your coding inside these stored procedures. Okay, you can use all your coding inside the stored procedures instead of putting it separately as a just an ad hoc SQL. You put all your code inside a stored procedure and then use these stored procedures whenever you want to run that code. Okay, so that's a stored procedure without a parameters and with two result sets. Now let's say here we were trying to pass the parameters also, right? So the reporting team comes back and says, okay, I need a reporting parameter as well. Okay, he wants to provide the customer ID, and then based on that customer ID he wants to get the data. So right now it's showing all John's and Tom's information, right? So based on this customer ID, I want to filter out the data where c dot customer ID is this, and then I'll put the same query here, where clause, and then I'll change the definition of the stored procedure. And then now if I run this stored procedure without the parameter, it says procedure or function expects parameter this one, which was not supplied. Okay, so when the parameter is specified, you have to pass some value to it. Okay, so pass customer ID as one of the customer IDs here. Let's say 1010, and you can see John Baggett's information showed up. This is the customer information, this is the order information. Okay, so that's how you can use input and output parameters when you are working with the stored procedures. Okay.